Hey, welcome to the first edition of the Big Me Kickoff podcast. I don't even know what to call it. You've heard of the Big Noon show. I don't want Fox's lawyers coming after me, so I'm Kevin Noon. It's going to be the Big Me Kickoff, and here we go. So welcome to the show. It is Friday of Oregon Week, September 10th, and I've got a special guest with me from the Oregonian, from Fox Sports Eugene. My friend, your friend too, James Crepea, here to talk about the Oregon Ducks and everything here. And, for full disclosure, I've known James for years. So with the opportunity to be able to get him on the show and talk a little bit of sports is a treat. James, how are you doing, man?
I appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks, man. Yeah, I like the name. I think Big Me. At first, I'm like, wait a minute, what? And then yes, it clicked very quickly. Yeah, not much sleep the last week, so yes, now it makes all the sense in the world. There's
Yeah,
something with maybe high noon, perhaps, but yes, but Big Me. I like it. It works. It works very nicely. Yeah.
I mean, and certainly you're dealing with what the Oregon team's going to be dealing with, a little bit of jet lag coming across the country or whatnot. We're recording this in the late afternoon. They're going to have to be playing a game at 9 a.m. according to their body clocks.
Mhm.
I think it's just par for the course for West Coast teams, but it's something that's going to be very real.
It is for me. I'll say this much: I don't think the team has had quite the same sleep deprivation that I have the last week. I would hope not. So that part of it aside, the jet lag component of it, yeah, I mean it's real. There's no getting around that. That's just human. But they do fly in Thursday night, so they have a little bit more by way of acclimation. It's not like they're flying in Friday and then having to deal with the adjustment on that quickly. So they are flying in Thursday night. They'll have a practice on Friday, and then obviously go through whatever walkthrough they do. I don't believe they go to the stadium. They generally don't. It was part of their walkthroughs, and then obviously the game, like you say. That said, I know I wrote the story on it last week. At this point, 1 week ago, on Thursday night before Ohio State's season opener, about the 9 a.m. Pacific time kick and what Rob Mullins, Oregon's athletic director, what Mario Cristobal had to say in this. And I know that got some traction, and I knew it would. I mean, it naturally would. Listen, administratively, they're not happy for obvious reasons. To the body clock issue, competitive purposes, sure, but it's more about this was not what was discussed, according to Rob Mullins, when this series was set up. Now, forget about that last year got knocked out of the way. Everybody was disappointed about that. That's a given. All right, and then Ohio State and Gene Smith came through and raised the payout for this game monumentally, because otherwise Oregon would have pulled out of the game and just pay the $1 million to get out of it, because it would have been worth more to them to go back on campus and play an on-campus game and just say, the heck with this, if they didn't get a bigger payout. So how that part of it came together, sure, between the schools. This isn't with their grudge, their issue in administratively. It has nothing to do with Ohio State. It has to do with when they put this series together, that the thought process was that the games would be in primetime windows, particularly East Coast primetime windows. Now, yeah, circumstances change. Oh, well, the Michigan and Washington series got scheduled after the fact, and I can't remember exactly the chronology of the Colorado-Texas A&M game. But for all intents and purposes, if you want to be quite honest, there is simply no way that this game should be at a noon Eastern kick. And frankly, I know Ohio State fans aren't exactly loving the idea of noon Eastern. There's plenty of people who like to tailgate a little bit more than they'll get to do on Saturday. But to the players, to the coaches, Oregon is not making this a deal. They haven't said a word about it all week. They weren't even asked about it all week, and for good reason. They're out there practicing. They're on the practice field at 8:45 in the morning, and they're still a quarter school, which for some Ohio State fans and alums, they can remember that. So class isn't going on. This is not something that they've had to monumentally recalibrate themselves. No, they had to fly from the West Coast to the East Coast. That's about it. Other than that, the 9 a.m. Pacific component of things is more to the fans back home watching. And that's why, like I say, it's more of an administrative issue.
Yeah, I grew up on the West Coast. I remember, especially with Sunday NFL football, being like, "Oh, I'm too sick to go to church, so I could watch, NFL games and cartoons." I had to watch Popeye and all of that on KTLA in Los Angeles. But yeah, certainly with this whole series has kind of just gone awry with 2020 falling apart the way that it did. No non-conference games. We're not going to relitigate everything there of how certain conferences handled things at that point. And now,
Mm-hmm.
this game is in the situation that it is in terms of it being noon. And you're exactly right. Fans around Columbus certainly upset whether or not it's A lot
I'm
of them
sure there's
play
a lot of
multi-sig.
businesses who were, who obviously missed out on a ton last year, who were looking forward to this as a way to, you know, hey, I'll give them a plug. I don't care. I don't know if they do business with you, but I'm sure Tommy's Pizza and Company and plenty of others are looking forward to a little bit more,
Right.
than a Kegs and Eggs crowd. So that's the point. Is like, I'm sure there's a lot of people, not just, viewers at home, whether it be fans back on the West Coast for Oregon, whether it be fans across the country who watch this game at noon. Yeah, I think again, administratively on the ground, all politics is local politics. For an Oregon fan base, it's going to be 9 a.m. Yeah, you could say, well, game days at 6. They're normally up. Well, they're not. Not in the numbers that they are elsewhere. They're not. It's not that way. They can be when it's on a West Coast, when it's on campus and stuff, obviously. But in the middle, second weekend in September, no, it's just not the same way. And then, frankly, again, for Ohio State side of things, they're trying to sell tickets. I think if this was a night game, I think ticket sales would be a little better.
Right.
Or at least a mid-afternoon game. And then again, all the business impact and trickle impact into the city and the university district and everything else. So again, for the on-the-field product, I don't think it'll have any impact. I really don't. But for the everything around the game impact, yeah, it's not ideal. And it's not what was, again, according to Rob Mullins, not what was discussed with the television network partners when this series was hatched many years ago. And you could say circumstances changed, this, that, the other. They knew that Mets-Yankees playing on 9/11 was a very real possibility, if not probability. So that's not like some wild card, like, oh, we didn't realize it was. They knew exactly. They knew what the date was. Yes, thank you. They planned this for this to be, in a more premier time slot. It's not.
Well,
The
and as I
fans who
say,
have disappointment on that, your athletic directors involved, I can say, are on your side on that particular matter.
well, and you look at this and you know that, Fox writes a big check and Fox wants to own that 12 p.m. Eastern window. And Ohio State ran into this a couple years ago in the Penn State series because of the World Series coverage, because Fox isn't going to bump World Series games to FS1. So it's certainly going to move its A game into that noon window. So Ohio State plays at Penn State, ABC game, it's on at night and it's a whiteout and so on and so forth. The following year, it's in Columbus. Ohio State is, it's a Fox game and it gets played at noon. So I think that there's certainly some uneven feelings there. You can make the argument about recruiting. It's harder for you to get kids in from a distance, even though California crew is going to be there from St. John Bosco, a lot of kids, but they're going to have to come in early to be able to do this. And of course, I mean, I was an undergrad at some point. I certainly remember I wanted to have 2 or 3 regularly priced beers rather than $11 stadium beers. And you're not going to have that opportunity when once you're in the confines of Ohio Stadium. And back in our day, we were sneaking anything we could in there because there weren't alcohol sales.
Oh, we don't need to share those tales, Kevin.
Well, I was going to say the real talk is what generally makes my show so popular. But let's move right on. I won't talk
They
about
were definitely. All I know is I could just say this much. I witnessed many a flask being pulled out of numerous garments
yes,
in the South stands in the early 2000s.
I had a wineskin full of Southern Comfort taped to my back a lot of games too, and it was always better during the winter because you had the heavy coat on and they weren't going to pat you down, but you just didn't want to be showing. So, and then you would sit there and you pour some of your Coke out and you put the SoCo in there and you.
Okay, all right. We don't have to give away all the. All right.
Hey, I'm not. If I start sneaking this into the press box, I mean, Gene Smith might ban me from there. So I have to be careful with all that. I save it for after the game. But getting back to the game, a top 15 matchup. I think a lot of people are maybe surprised going into the year that Oregon was ranked just at the edge of the top 10, just outside of the top 10. I think everybody thought this was going to be a top 10 matchup. Maybe Ohio State inside the top 5, Oregon 7, 8. What are your thoughts on where Oregon is ranked? I mean, it means nothing at this point. None of the rankings mean anything until the very end. But you're on sports radio. People love to talk about it. So let's talk about it.
I thought going into the season, I thought it made plenty of sense. If any, let's put it this way: you would have had to bend over backwards to come up with a reason to put Oregon higher than 11. I thought you would have had to have looked for every possible thing to make, you name it, Notre Dame, North Carolina, Cincinnati in particular, who are the teams where they were supposed to jump? You knew they weren't jumping anybody in the top 6, or Iowa State certainly really in the top 7. So you really got into the argument about Cincinnati, UNC, Notre Dame. Oregon didn't deserve to start the season ahead of any of those teams. They didn't. If you're basically, like I say, you'd have to bend over backwards to come up with any which blemish. And obviously, look, UNC lost its season opener to Virginia Tech. But they still have a premier quarterback. Yeah, they may have a very not so good offensive line, but they have a great quarterback. There's a degree of certainty there. And they play in a conference where, yeah, they could probably get away with a loss, at least one, and still compete for a conference title. Where Oregon was coming off a year where, they finished unranked. So to put them, from 26, 28, all the way into the top 10, that would have been off a 7-game season with a change in quarterback. I mean, sooner or later, you got to start asking, like, wait a minute, is this getting just kind of like way disproportionately overhyped? So, no, I thought their preseason positioning was fair. And I think the fact that they basically held ground, more or less, they moved up one spot in the coaches from 12 to 11. They dropped one spot in the AP from 11 to 12. They held ground off of an unimpressive performance, offensively in particular, where they were losing in the fourth quarter at home to a Fresno State team who I said heading into the game was going to be a legitimate test and wasn't going to be a pushover. I didn't think they'd ever lead in the fourth quarter, but I did say that they had a lot of transfers, a lot of experienced players from all levels of college football, including former Pac-12 players. The quarterback played at Washington, and then one of the receivers played at Washington. Said, look, they're not going to come into Autzen and roll over and take a 40-point loss. Now, that was a team that was going to have a competitive situation. Oregon did not perform anywhere near its potential and near its peak. And that's why many Oregon fans who have emailed, tweeted, and everything else at me over the last 4 or 5 days have been so filled with a degree of angst and some with just downright pessimism because they're basically looking for something to sell themselves on, and they can't. And they can only look at the things that they feel like were some of them have just gone the complete other direction, abject failures and shortcomings already. And it's like, all right, they haven't even gotten to the premier game, and they're already ready to. So that's the nature of college football. It's overreaction, overreaction Monday or overreaction Sunday. It's an annual. That's really what Labor Day and the Labor Day Tuesday should be for college football. Just massive overreaction Monday and Tuesday. Who are we already firing? Other than apparently Randy Edsall, where there wasn't overreaction at all.
Exactly. Now, talking about angst and everything there's got to be a lot of angst among fans about the ankle of Kayvon Thibodeaux.
Mm-hmm.
I know that coaches aren't going to necessarily say, here's what's going on 100% with our team. Just go ahead and plan against us this way, and we're going to be 100% truthful. But what's kind of your read on the Thibodeaux situation?
Let's go back to the incident in of itself. It is fortunate that he was able to walk off under his own power and put weight on the foot, get taped up, return to the game, make a tackle when he got back out there. So this is not somebody who, they didn't get carted off. He didn't get helped off. He did move off the field and then return to the field. So if you're looking for glimmers of positivity, I think you got it fairly immediately. Having said that, he then left shortly before halftime, and we didn't know at the time, was this, it's Oregon, so there's always new uniforms, new cleats. It's a season opener, so there's always new everything. For all I knew, they were, making an adjustment to the equipment with the tape, and they were going to, put on a bigger shoe. Well, then when he didn't come out after halftime, then you knew something had obviously taken a little bit of a greater degree of seriousness or at least precautions. No, they have not put anything definitive this week, but I would say just based on just kind of peripheral things, it's hard to kind of describe it as anything truly tangible because we're not at practice, and I'm sure, basically everywhere there's very, very few places in the country that have a lot of in-season practice viewing and access and those sorts of things. Oregon used to have a little bit more, but now they've gone the other way. So based on what we have seen, which is obviously nothing on the field, really just kind of players milling about thereafter, not great signs. That said, there are like 30 different means by which people can access buildings, walk around, move around, elevators, stairwells, and every which other thing at their complex, which is why I don't make much of any of that. So we can talk about, well, what's kind of like reading the tea leaves or signs. I can just say like it questionable is about as good as I can put it. You know, if I had seen him trotting off the practice field and looking chipper as ever, I'd say we're not even just talking about probable. Like, of course he's playing. Like, I don't need anybody to tell me. Right there. But we didn't have that this week. But I don't think the absence of that means he's absolutely not playing at all.
Right.
Now, I did ask Mario earlier in the week, hey, is it possible for somebody who doesn't practice at all to play? You will hear from most any college football coach or NFL coach for that matter that the other answer is no.
Right.
I mean, just realistically. Having said that, if there was if there was a player in the sport who might be able to get away with it, not only because of the caliber of of the player that they are on the field, but who could literally take only mental reps and still be actually okay to play, I would argue it's probably Kayvon Thibodeaux. Maybe Derek Stingley Jr., maybe. But ultimately, there's a couple players in the sport who could probably pull it off if they absolutely had to, which is, again, a stretch, and I'm not recommending it. But Mario said, no, that's it's just not something they do. You don't put somebody in that position. It's not in their best interest, not in the team's best interest, et cetera. And how do you talk about competition and things and earning it on the practice field to everybody else, and then that happens? So we'll see. Obviously I'm not certainly back in Eugene and having anything to do with practice today. So it is possible certainly that he could have been limited on Tuesday or Wednesday to some degree, and then gotten back out there today for all I know. Go through a walkthrough tomorrow for all I know. Totally viable. We would not know. So I will say this much: very early Saturday, after one of my 32 media hits that I'm doing this week. Very early Saturday when I get to Ohio Stadium, I will be eagerly awaiting the arrival of Oregon's buses, much like probably everybody else from the media corps, including Fox Television, to see what everyone looks like getting off the bus, starting with Kayvon Thibodeaux, and then there's even, it's the rumor mill world, so I don't want to acknowledge things and give credence to things that's just rumor mill, but there are, a few other things that have been thrown out there by the nameless, faceless people of the world. So,
and that leads right into my next one, and I was going to say, we certainly have heard the name Justin Flo mentioned, but nameless, faceless is absolutely right. And, it didn't seem that at Wednesday availability that there really was anything that came out of that. And, certainly, how much trouble would Oregon potentially be in if, let's just put it in the what if situation, Kayvon Thibodeaux unable to go, Justin Flo unable to go. There are three names I think of on that defense, and we've named two of them right there, with Noah Sewell being the third, and I know they got some dudes in the secondary, but those are two huge names.
Yeah, those two monumental names. Thibodeaux was top-ranked recruit overall by at least one of the services when he came out. Flo was the number one inside linebacker recruit in the class of 2020. Both 5 stars, both future NFL players, both unbelievably game-wrecking ability kind of players. So talking Thibodeaux first, what would it mean if he was unable to go? Well, top pass rusher in the country, not being able to play is, against an offensive line of this caliber, not great, not ideal. Having said that, do they have depth on the edge? They do, both on the boundary side and on the field side. And Mace Funa had played pretty well last week. He did off the field side, but in terms of the boundary side, you saw Braden Swinson last week. You could pull up his stat line to see how he did. It was his most significant game action then he filled in right away for Thibodeaux. The sack that he had came because of Kayvon Thibodeaux. So they can get teamed together. It's not just on their depth and the way that they ran their defense last week, in particular in the first game under Tim DeRuyter, defensive coordinator. You saw they're not just, here's the joker designated pass rushing linebacker. Oh, okay, here's the second guy. That's the only way they're going to get on the field is one ones with the twos, and if there's a breather or whatever. No, they on a third down, they threw them all out there and created a pass rush package, which is hardly unique. And like I say, Swinson benefited from it in order to get that sack. So he made some plays, but again, was his most significant game action. He has certainly not played against the caliber of offensive linemen that'll be playing this weekend, whether he plays in a complementary role to Kayvon Thibodeaux or he plays in place of Kayvon Thibodeaux. But was the Georgia 4A State High School Player of the Year a couple of years ago, and was a really dynamic edge player in high school, and been in the program for a couple of years, and now is in a position to be a significant contributor this season regardless, and we'll see how the rest of the season goes. But in terms of Saturday, yeah, it's a name that you're going to hear a lot regardless of what happens with Thibodeaux. Adrian Jackson Jr., one of the better players coming out of Colorado when he came out, if not the number one player, I think, maybe coming out of Colorado the year he came out. He's just dealt with a couple of injuries over the years, but again, a really dynamic edge player for pass rush purposes. So they have some depth there. I'm not telling you that they equal. There is no replacing. Okay, this isn't like replace them in the aggregate. Yeah, that's a great concept. Not really, but they do have depth there. If they were to incur either heading into the game with something, as you mentioned with Justin Flo, and I really do not want to give a ton of credence to it because I've been asked about it by people and I've just downright not acknowledged it because until there was actually something substantiated, there wasn't. But having said that, because of what we didn't see in terms of him, if he were unable to go for any reason or even just comes out of the game for that matter. Drew Mathis got hurt last week. He started over Justin Flo. He is one of the super seniors. He had leg surgery on Tuesday. He's obviously out this week, could be out for some period of time. They had a preseason injury to one of their other inside backers. The next man in line who came in for Flo after he got the 15-yard personal foul for a late hit on a sliding quarterback was Nate Hukalani. He is a former walk-on who had played in junior college, so I think the walk-on thing was probably had more to do with just the timing of things than anything, but nevertheless, super senior who is back because of the fact that he could be a super senior. That's fourth. Another option would be Keith Brown, who was the number one player in Oregon high school football a year ago. He's a true freshman, though. And he didn't play much at all last week. He was held back because of just like a minor injury of some kind. If Brown can go, I think he probably is the next man in practicality. It may be Hukalani because of game experience and the like, but if in terms on a larger scale number of plays, if Keith Brown can go, it would probably be him. After that, you start getting into another true freshman in Jabril McNeil, who started off fall camp on the outside. They moved him inside. He could do both, but still. Or some other options where things start to get pretty thin in a hurry because this is a group who, like I say, preseason injury, game one injury, and now maybe something else or not. But at the very least, you know of what you know of. Preseason injury, in-season injury, a week one practice minor injury, just knocked out three guys in a room of like 6 or 7. So things have gotten thin at that position, to say the least.
You're listening to the Big Me Kickoff Show. I'm getting a little feedback there, but I'm your host, Kevin. And we're joined by James Crepea of the Oregonian and Fox Sports Eugene, talking about the Oregon game. Let's trying to figure out why we're getting the feedback. Let's jump ahead to Anthony Brown, the quarterback. Played at BC, had a pretty okay career there. Jumps in over at Oregon, sees a little limited playing time. Previously, comes out. I don't have the numbers in front of me. 17 to 23. $179. A lot of people label him more as a run first guy. Throwing is a bit of an afterthought. Do you think we could see Mario Cristobal kind of change that up and try to utilize guys like Johnny Johnson and whatnot to test an Ohio State secondary that still has not really gotten its footing yet?
So we could do more than a podcast on an episode and one round on this, Kevin. There's phases, right? In program building, there's phases. There's phases in adjustment and evolution of offenses or defenses, for that matter. Joe Moorhead is in his second year at Oregon. The first year was, I don't even know what to do with that for anyone in the Pac-12, him, Oregon, or anybody else in the league. And there were teams in the league who played 4 games. Like, what, you really call that a season? I say all that to say they ran a style of offense in Mario's first couple of years where they set a foundation and they had Justin Herbert and a very, very talented offensive line and a receiving core that was, of the various groups on the offense, the weak link. In 2018, even really into 2019, though they tried to replenish it, but a lot of injuries happened and just unfurled the way it did. And yet Justin Herbert still managed over the course of that time to have a receiver in 18 and Dylan Mitchell, who was a 7th-round pick who set program receiving records for a single season in 2018. A tight end in Jake Breland, who was on his way to being a Mackey Award finalist, if not outright winner in a landslide in 2019, before suffering a season-ending knee injury. Capped off with some very nice passing performances against USC and some others. Once Juwan Johnson got back out there, and he now made it to the NFL. An offensive line, like I mentioned, who has 4 guys who made it into the league. But a key pillar of all of that, in 2018 especially, and even into 2019 with Justin Herbert, was C.J. Verdell, the running back. Last season, Verdell got hurt in the second game, played through a thumb injury where he could basically barely hold the football for the following 3 games, and missed the first 2 games, outright missed the first 2 games of his career, in the Pac-12 title game and the Fiesta Bowl. Travis Dye, the second running back, and they really are co-starters. Like, Dye technically got the start last week, but Verdell had more carries and more yards. He's also a really explosive player, explosive out of the backfield in the passing game, probably a little bit more dynamic in space like that than he is, particularly as a between the tackles runner. Verdell is a just ball of energy. He's a power back in, I wouldn't say he's not a scat back body. That's unfair. Like, Travis is more of a scat back. CJ is a power back in a just more compact body. And because he plays with that reckless abandon, he plays like somebody who's in his 230s. And as a result of that, he has incurred a long list of minor injuries. What does this all have to do with what you're getting at with, well, what are they going to do in the passing game? They are trying to evolve and do more and have more explosive plays and use Anthony Brown Jr. to do that. Lose the ground game to open things up, but be more explosive in the passing game. They tried that. They are trying that. It's an active thing. It's not one time you fail and you give up. But it doesn't happen instantaneously. It was game 1 for a new starting quarterback against a team in Fresno State who does cause a lot of disruption in the backfield and has a lot of experience in its front 7. No, it's not an elite team. No, it's not a team that's going to make the playoff. No, it's not a team that should have been leading at Autzen Stadium in the 4th quarter. And no, it's not a team that Oregon should have only beaten by 7. But you have to credit the opponent with the talent that it had and what it managed to do. Were they trying to have some more explosive plays in the passing game? Yeah. They nearly connected on several, but nearly doesn't count. But if you ask Oregon fans, some of them will tell you they didn't even try, and that's just wrong. I mean, that's just flat out incorrect. They missed on what could have been a huge game to Johnny Johnson down the field. It was a slightly underthrown ball. They missed on what could have been like I believe somewhere in the realm, about a 90-yard touchdown to Micah Pittman, where, frankly, if you want to talk about a feast or famine on the play, and ended up with nothing, just an incompletion. Anthony Brown Jr. got damn near sacked. I thought it could have been a defensive touchdown. He was in the end zone. Mike linebacker was totally free, had a clean path to him. He evaded him, got a throw off. Pittman dove for it. He had to. And it was just beyond his reach. If there's no pressure on the quarterback, that's a pass for 45, 50-plus yards. And with Pittman having the space that he had, he'd have run the whole field. So are they looking for more explosive plays? Yeah. They nearly had several. Now, again, nearly doesn't count. And they nearly had a couple more on the ground, too. It's game 1, but we only have the 1 game sample. And because it wasn't Ohio State level explosiveness or Oklahoma level explosiveness or Alabama or LSU level explosiveness from the last couple of years, Oregon fans who are dying for their offense to look like it looked in yesteryear, when that's all they cared about was offense to the nth degree. Who cares about physicality and who cares about defense? They are bemoaning what they are seeing right now. So it's a one-game sample, but when they go up against what they know is a juggernaut and are heading into that matchup, that's why there's not a ton of optimism.
Exactly. I hear you. I want to thank you for being part of the show. I promised I'd keep you about a half hour. I've got 10 more questions we could go through. I know you got about 30 more media availabilities that you've got to do.
We could do a rapid fire if you had something.
Yeah, let's just get to the one that I think everybody wants to kind of hear, and that goes to, how do you see this game playing out? I mean, I know we just love to pin people down to predictions and then hurl cabbage and tomatoes at them when they're wrong. But how do you see this game going down?
I haven't even set my. I opened the week. I want to say it was. I think I put in. I think it was 35-21. I'm losing track now, or maybe 38-24, something like that. I'm still somewhere around there. I don't think Oregon has the firepower right now to hang with Ohio State over the course of 4 quarters. I think it could certainly be competitive early. If they're going to win, if Oregon is going to win, then I think that they have to use Verdell. I think that they have to set the agenda on the ground. Not quite do what Minnesota did. That's they're not going to trot out 13 personnel. I mean, that's just not happening. It's not what they do. But I think they do have to try to control the game and limit Ohio State's offensive plays as best as possible by just not letting them have the ball very much. No, that doesn't mean go and do the Stanford thing and bleed the clock to the nth degree. And no. Don't misunderstand me. But I don't think you can win this game in a shootout. This is not a team right now, today, that is built to do that. I think by the end of the season, if certain things broke certain ways, if certain injuries weren't there, if some of the young freshman receivers came along and it showed a level of consistency that we just haven't seen because it's been one game so far, all sorts of things, perhaps things change. But do I think that this is a team that, there's no way in my mind that I can envision Oregon winning 38-35. That's just not, to me, I don't know how there's a viable path to victory there in that style of a game. I think if Oregon's going to win, there would have to be something to the effect of 28-21, 28-24 sort of thing. I don't know, given at least the uncertainty with Thibodeaux alone, combined with what was not a great offensive performance, and the unbelievable explosiveness that Ohio State has, that Oregon at this point can cap this Ohio State offense to under 30 points. And even at 28, I still think Ohio State wins. So at this point, I'm going Ohio State. I'm going Ohio State 35-21, 35-24, somewhere in that general ballpark.
So Ohio State in the 30s, Oregon in the 20s seems to be a consensus out there. But James, I want to thank you for being part of the show. Looking forward to seeing you in the press box today on Saturday, and we'll wrap some things up maybe over a beer later.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate you as always, Kevin.
All right, and I want to thank everybody else for being part of the show here, kicking off our first Big Me Kickoff. Once again, I'm your host, Kevin Noon. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you here very soon.